Hallo zusammen, hier ist Christine von yesnomas.com und heute sind Paul und ich hier in Pilsen, also immer noch in der Tschechischen Republik. Und zwar sind wir hier bei der Pilsner Urquell Brauerei und der Jan Dienstbier, er zeigt uns jetzt die Brauerei und ja, genießt es.
Pilsner Urquell, which was born right here at this brewery. The history of this brewery begins in 1839 when 260 licensed brewers of the city of Pilsen decided to establish a rather joint brewery in order to save reputation of the Pilsner beer. Beer type style became so widespread that 70% of all the beers produced around the world are Pilsner type beers. Okay, now we can go to the courtyard and I will show you some interesting structures here. On the opposite side we have the most dominant structure of this brewery, water tower built in 1907 supposedly as a replica of some Dutch lighthouse. It has lighthouse appearance for a reason, so that when travelers were coming to Pilsen could see that here is the ocean of beer. It's about 50 meters high. By the way, same height as the Statue of Liberty. And inside the top are two parallel water tanks from which water used to be distributed by gravity into the whole brewery complex until 2005. Old brew house, where we will go later, is in the yellow building, and the new one, where Pilsner Urquell is brewed since 2004, is in the glass building right next to it. We'll also have a chance to look inside that one. Here you can see different means of beer transportation. In early days, beer used to be delivered by horse-pulled carts. This tradition is actually still kept alive even today. Yeah. We have one lady who delivers Pilsner Urquell twice a week to the most traditional pubs in Pilsen. Later on, with the development of steam engines, beer trains came along, and this was one of the first breweries in the world which had its own railroad system leaving directly from this expedition area as early as 1880. And 15 years later, again one of the first breweries which purchased its own train locomotive, which was called Gambrinus. Now we stand in front of the central packaging hall, which is almost 7 years old, and it's still one of the most modern in Europe. Inside you will see 4 filling lines from German company Kronex. The size of this building is 20,000 square meters, 5 football fields, and investment was worth 46 million euros. So far the biggest investment here probably ever. 24,000 bottles fit in there at once, and then I'll watch for about 20 minutes.
Really big.
Yes. Big, small bus in here actually.
Yeah. It's certainly the largest elevator I've ever been in.
Hunter?
It's certainly the largest elevator I've ever seen. Yeah.
Usually have freight elevators this big.
Yeah.
For people, because we get up to 50 people on the trains sometimes.
Okay. What's the busiest month? Would it be now?
June. Right. May, June are the busiest.
Pilsner Urquell. A beer is born. The story of Bohemia's most famous beer, Pilsner Urquell, began in Pilsen on October the 5th, 1842.
Only selected varieties of two-row spring barley. Barley is soaked in water for 30 hours, and then they let it germinate for about 5 days. On the 6th day, it's dried in kilns and it becomes malt. Malt is already a little bit sweeter and softer. If you don't have allergies to gluten, you can sample barley and malt and notice the difference. As far as color, Pilsen malt, you can tell the difference between the Pilsen malt and raw barley. Pilsen malt is the palest of all malts on the spectrum. I think the next one in color, a little bit darker, is Viennese. The color of the malt determines the color of the beer. If you want to make pale beer, you will use pale malt. But if you want to make dark beer, you will use roasted malt. And of course, there's anything in between that. And here we have hops. Granulated Czech sauce hops. Hops are the spice of beer. Malt is the soul of beer.
Okay.
These are Czech sauce hops, which are the most expensive hops in the world.
I love a good hoppy taste. I love hoppy beers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, then you will like Pilsner Urquell.
Yeah.
Czech sauce hops, that goes with the regions where they are grown. It's not too far from Pilsen, it starts out about 50 kilometers northeast from here. And 3 other German hops form what they call noble European hops. They all have very noble, fine aroma and delicate bitterness, especially the sauce. And so they're not hybrids, and the yields therefore are not so high. Those cones are actually pretty light compared to other hops. So if you want to get the bitterness, you have to use quite a lot of them, and pay the high price. So nobody's really getting rich over there because the yields are quite low. This old brew house has been used for almost 75 years until 2004. That's when the new one was built, and this one is now a museum. In 2007, it was remodeled and restored back to its original beauty. So this is pretty much what it used to look like in 1931. So this is the new one, the new brew house, which has 3 brewing sets. That one had 6, but these are bigger. 1 mash tun, which is the second one on the top. 2 mash kettles. 1 loud tun, where the filtration is done. It used to be done on the same mash tun of the old brew house. And then sweet wort goes through the 2. Basically, production of beer usually is like a 3-phase process. Most breweries don't have malt house, so it would be just 2. They just buy already prepared malt. We have our own, always had. So the malt house number 5 now is the 5th one in a row. Malt house where you make malt, brew house where you make hopped wort, bittersweet liquid, and then the fermentation. That's where it finally gets interesting, where the beer is done. But the brew house is pretty much everywhere called the heart of the brewery because this is where the most important process takes place. It's actually quite complicated.
Does this ever go wrong, or is it so automated now that it can't?
It's the computers. They have sensors, and the computers monitor the process. And if they would have to fall asleep behind the computer for it to go bad. The temperature, 37 degrees centigrade, is very critical. If you let it at that temperature too long, or if the electricity went out, you could just throw it away. I don't think it has happened, but it's very critical because it would, that's the acidic breaking temperature, forming temperature, and if you expose it too long to that, then it will just get sour. Right. It's not reversible. Of course, Josef Grohl has to be here, the great brew master who came here from Vilshofen, and he came here with, at the time, very precious lager yeast, bottom fermenting yeast. Only 3% of all the Czech beers were lagers at the time, mostly ales and stouts, or wheat beers. And this right here is the holy grail of Pilsner Urquell. This is the original open copper kettle where the first Pilsner beer was made. But it wasn't called Urquell until 1898. distinguished visitors who came into the brewery are listed over here. Crown Prince Rudolf from the Habsburg family was here in 1871 and drank from this Czech crystal glass that the brewery made for that occasion. Grand Duke Vladimir Alexandrovich was here in 1897 and he was uncle of the last Russian Tsar Nicholas. Drank from that one. And the most prominent visitor here back then was the Caesar of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Franz Joseph I. Drank from this crystal glass. Below we have his signature, and if you look closely enough, you can notice that he made a mistake while he was trying to sign in Czech. Of course, he had a few beers in him already from that beautiful glass, so he forgot. He signed in German, Franz. First four letters are the same, just a Z. When he realized that he wanted to do it in Czech, he overwrote to T, and then he continued directly in Czech. So that signature is probably quite valuable, very unique.
Yeah.
So one of the oldest parts of the brewery is this entrance. As you can see, 1839, they started digging the cellars. At the same time, they started building the brewery. Underground, they could have low temperatures. Be careful down there because it's quite humid, 93%, so it's always wet and might be a little bit slippery. And also walls are sprayed with white lime, so don't get too close to them, otherwise it's going to get all over you.
So basically you have to dress up nice and warm for down here because it's 6 degrees, so about 42 Fahrenheit. So you make sure you bring a jumper if you visit this in the summer.
Here is the map of this underground cellar labyrinth. Try to memorize it just in case you get lost. Here is where we entered, back there, and that's where we will get out, hopefully. And here we are right now. If we put all these narrow lager cellars together, they would add up to 9 kilometers. Where the fermentation is still done in the traditional way. Yeah, thank you. Go upstairs and turn left from the bottom, you can see these old vats, and inside the ones that are marked is the real fermentation. On the 1st of August, they refilled them once again with the hop worm, which was brewed upstairs in the new brew house. Unique Pilsner Urquell type H yeast were added. And those yeasts start to saturate with the sugars and make alcohol for 12 days. Scroll. The temperature keeps rising because those yeasts also produce heat, and they need to keep it below 10 degrees. Otherwise, it's too warm and undesirable fermentation would begin. More esters would be produced. Yeah. Typical Pilsner though. That's why I carefully said directly or indirectly. But typical Pilsner beer has to be made of soft water, should be made of soft water. It has to be made of barley for malt, nothing but barley. Sometimes breweries will use cheaper rice, like 40% rice, 60% barley, 50% corn, 50% barley, substitutions. And Pilsners also should be generously hopped, so more bitter. Pilsner drinkers expect more spicy beer.
Yeah, because that's why generally I don't drink lagers. I don't enjoy them. I prefer a hoppy light ale in England.
IPA?
But yeah, exactly that kind of thing. But,
so if you're used to drinking, I never had IPA. I want to try it. But how would you? Because Pilsner is like the Czech IPA, sort of like not ale, but not so bitter. But how's the bitterness compared to what you are used to? Because India pale ales will have like 80 units.
Right.
And it's different.
Yes.
Right?
Yes,
so
it is.
Is it much more bitter than this?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily much more bitter. This is definitely sweeter, depending on the alcohol content, of course. But some of the microbreweries in America, you have their IPAs, and they're way too alcoholic, and they're just sweet and not so nice. But the others are pretty good. But this is very pleasant. Yeah.
And but he's like, I understand that, you know, here it's like with Pilsner Urquell, it's a must. And I told him, well, yeah, notice the glasses are made bigger. And this line, you should get your beer. Sometimes in Czech bars, you got to be careful. You will not even get it to that. But you should get your beer with this much beer and the rest foam. The foam is there for good reason. As long as it stays, it's like a seal, protection seal. It keeps the CO2 aroma inside the beer, and it prevents beer from oxidization. Once the foam goes away, beer is deteriorating by every minute. Also, if this foam stays on the glass, it's a sign of a quality beer, and also clean glass. When you see it, you know, the rings already went down, but you know, after, you know, when you take few sips, the bigger the sips, the foam the layer will stay on top around the glass, so you can see how many sips you took and how big they were. And if the glass has been cleaned with the proper detergents, if you use regular household detergents, the foam will go straight down, and the foam will also disappear faster.
Because the trace of the detergent will kill it.
Yeah, I think so. But you know, the detergents are so aggressive; they will still remain on the glass.
Yeah.
And usually they are very citrusy. You know, refreshingly citrusy. So unless you want rally beer with citrusy aroma, you don't want to clean it, or you have to really extra rinse it with water. Otherwise, it's so aggressive it will stay on the surface of the glass. Before beer is drafted into a glass again, if it's dried, if it has dried, meanwhile, you need to rinse it again, or moisten it rather. Not clean it because it's already clean, but moisten it, because beer should not be. It's better if you pour beer inside moistened glass. Okay. Even the bottles, when they're filled, they're actually just been rinsed, and then they are flipped back up and filled with beer.
Also, what are the three types of how you serve the beer? How you can serve it? You have the milk.
Yeah, milk. Actually, I think there are 4. Milk is just nothing but the foam. It's It's sometimes popular during summertime. It's more sweet. And it's, you know, refreshing. So you chug it down right away. No CO2, you know, because it's all in the foam already. So you should be served for small beer if you ask for milk. No, it's not a full beer. If you do milk, it's nothing but the foam. The foam is very wet, so you will get about this much beer out of it. Yeah. But it picks up the sweetness, so it's ladies sometimes get that if they know it. Then the second style is Schnitt, which is like about half beer, half foam, which is also small beer. And then you have Smooth. I believe that's, you know, with the foam at the first. And then you have Crisp style. And if you go to the restaurant Nas Pilsen, you can have at least three of those styles. So this is the ice room behind me. This was like the refrigerator of my ancestors without any electricity. Keep in mind that on a hot summer day, when it's 30 degrees outside, like today maybe, the natural temperature here is about 14 degrees. That is still too warm for the fermentation. So they had to get ice, which they would chop up and harvest in the winter. Ice would be brought down through the holes into the ice rooms. When it started to warm up again, spring, summer, ice would slowly melt into freezing cold water, which would flow through the channels, cooling down the temperature to desirable 6 degrees or even lower.